Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Ancient Warfare Answers with me, Murray, your weekly 10-minute break from the real world to think about the ancient world of warfare. Exciting. I know I am, always. But, of course, I answer questions from viewers and listeners in this segment, and today will be no different. And of course, you can ask us a question. You can comment on a previous video or podcast. You can send us an email, send us a postcard. You can stop me in the street. No one stopped me in the street, but we'll see. Hopefully, fingers crossed one day. If you do cross me in the street, I will get very excited. So I warn you now. Anyway, of course, you can back us on Patreon. Go to Patreon/Ancient Warfare Podcast. You can back us at one of three levels: Legionary, Optio, or Centurion. Even get a copy of the magazine, where probably you'll hear me write the same things that I say very often. Hopefully, I don't say things that contradict what I write every now and then. Anyway, this question today is from Blake Jardine, and he says, "I love your podcast. My question is about ancient Roman enemies and the most well-remembered. My question is, why do we talk about, say, Spartacus, Boudica, or Hannibal over, say, Genseric or Shapur I, especially since the latter were more successful against Rome than the former? I have a few theories, but I wanted to hear your answer." Indeed, very interesting. So who are the foes that the Romans talk about most? And the interesting one there, and you make a really interesting point about Genseric and Shapur I, even Shapur II, that they are successful. I mean, even Arminius, in the Teutoburg, those victories are away from Rome. They don't threaten Rome. And so in a lot of ways, they can be kept out of mind from Roman sort of sensibilities, if you like. And we've got to remember that for a long time in the Roman Empire, Rome is the center. Even when it shifts to Milan, it's not thinking necessarily about the periphery. And a lot of these victories are occurring on the periphery. Now, at the same time, of course, when the peripheries revolt, when Britain revolts, or there's a revolt on the German frontier, or indeed in the east, these are crises that need dealing with, and they are armies are dispatched to deal with them. Even imperially led armies are dispatched to deal with them. But they're not really affecting the Roman psyche. And so that's, I think, for those reasons. Now, you might say, but hang on, what about Boudica? Boudica's in Britain. And I suppose in a way, the fact that she's a queen, the sort of the Mad Queen comparisons to Cleopatra are made there, that this is a threat. This is a topsy-turvy world where things are turned upside down. They're not meant to be military leaders against us. So there's that. But I don't know that Boudica's really ever regarded as a great threat or a great enemy. Hannibal, absolutely. Spartacus, less so. Spartacus is interesting because, of course, he's only a slave. He's a gladiator. There's a whole bunch of weird backstories given to Spartacus that are not in the sources. Sorry, that modern Spartacuses give us a whole bunch of different backstories. The ancient sources give us backstories that to explain how a mere slave, a mere gladiator from Thrace could have been successful. Florus, I think it is, who tells us, he was a Roman centurion. He was demoted, and so their explanation of his abilities is made because he had been trained by the Romans. Arminius, similarly, is, trained in Rome, becomes a traitor, but it's essentially us turning on ourselves. Likewise, in the later civil wars, they're not generally talked about. We don't talk about Pompey and Caesar, we don't talk about Antony and Octavian. We talk about Cleopatra and Octavian. We don't talk about the threat that Antony poses. We talk about the threat that Cleopatra poses, even though it's Antony and Cleopatra. Similarly, whenever there's a usurper who marches on Rome, we're not bringing up that raises difficult questions, as any civil war does, of brothers against brothers. And so those are sort of ignored, which leaves, of course, which enemies are talked about and which do enter the Roman psyche. And the fascinating thing there is that it is the Gauls, because the Gauls sack Rome in 390 BC at the Battle of the Allia and the defense of the Capitol thereafter. And so there's always a harking back to that happening. Even Caesar can appeal to that memory in the 50s, but it's been 340 years since that happened. Hannibal, absolutely, because he's entrenched in Rome for such a long time. Hannibal at the gates and all that sort of thing. But in a way, because the Carthaginians are wiped off the face of the earth by the Romans at the end of the second, if not the third Punic War, that threat isn't quite as potent as the Gauls rebelling or the German tribes rebelling when the Cimbri and the Teutones invade in the late second century BC. You get another idea that the Germanic frontier is a threat, and that lasts a lot longer. In fact, all the way through into the fourth century, when the Romans are invaded by the Goths. And then Alaric, of course, sacks Rome. And when Alaric sacks Rome, there's call harking back to Marius, who of course defeats the Cimbri and the Teutones, and those sorts of things like that. The Dacians as well. Obviously, in the Marcomannic Wars of Marcus Aurelius, you get another invasion of a threatened invasion of Italy by the Marcomanni. So it's again sort of harking back to the Teutones and the Cimbri. And so those enemies that are most talked about at Rome are the ones that threaten most. And so even though those enemies are defeated, they still exist. A Gallic tribe could rise and march on Rome. The Helvetii, when Julius Caesar justifies his invasion of Gaul in 58 BC, it's all about the Helvetii and how the Gauls on the move could be like the Gauls of the Senones in 390 BC. So that absolutely appeals to Roman paranoia of invasion. The Cimbri and the Teutones, again, many later invasions of Rome or threatened invasions of Rome or crossings of the Rhine is all about them being another Cimbri and Teutones. So I think it's very much that the memory of the threat to Rome itself and to Italy itself informs what the Romans thought about who were the most important enemies that they'd fought. And some of the others, like Spartacus for us, and I mean, how Spartacus becomes a famous foe is really a much more modern take than an ancient one. When you think of Attila, similarly, there's an interesting twist on Attila because, of course, Attila threatens Rome, and the stories are that he's turned away by the Bishop of Rome, the Pope. But in reality, he was paid off. There was a huge amount of gold that went with him to make him leave, and he died that winter, so he didn't come back. He was absolutely coming back again. And so it's sort of downplayed in a way because, of course, Attila, when he invades Italy in, come on, brain, what's the year? 452? He sacks Mediolanum, he sacks Milan, he sacks several other cities, possibly up to 7 of them in the north. And then when he goes to go to Rome, even though Rome's not important by that point, he's stopped. And it's turned into a religious stop rather than he was paid off with gold. But he, is also a threat. But then the Huns disappear very quickly. The sons of Attila kind of blow up his empire and fight amongst themselves. So it's not really a threat thereafter. So in a way, those threats that threaten Rome are the ones that they remember. So therefore, when you go to the east, no Parthian king is going to march on Rome. That's not a threat. There are defeats like Crassus at Carrhae and others that need to be avenged, and sometimes never are. I mean, in a way, the Sassanid Persians are the longest-lasting threat to Rome, and then the Eastern Roman Empire, because the peace made after the death of Julian in 363 is humiliating to Rome, made by Jovian. So that's a fascinating one. That, of course, is a turning of the tables of the humiliating defeat made on the Persians by Galerius and Galerian, and Diocletian in 299. So it's a fascinating one. But those are never threatening Rome. They might threaten Constantinople later, but they're never really threatening Rome. And I think that in the Roman imagination, even after Rome ceases to be important, it's the enemies that were at the gates. So it's the Gauls, it's the Germans, it's Hannibal to a certain extent, but you could be another Hannibal, but the Carthaginians themselves aren't the threat. So I hope that answers your question. I hope maybe that's not actually in line with what your thoughts are. But thank you for your question, Blake, and I look forward to hopefully answering another question very soon. Thanks.